What if I told you that the most iconic feature of the Boeing 747, its majestic hump, wasn't created for aesthetics, luxury, or to house an exclusive lounge for the elite? What if, in fact, this revolutionary design that defined the golden age of aviation was born from a deep-seated fear, a risky gamble against the very future that Boeing was helping to build? The truth is that the hump of the Queen of the Skies is not a symbol of glamour, but rather a secret of survival, a masterstroke born from the uncertainty and prediction of its own obsolescence. Today we will unveil the hidden story behind the 747's hump, a story that blends engineering genius with the harsh reality of economics and a bet that, paradoxically, guaranteed the immortality of an airplane designed to disappear. Get ready, because after today you will never look at the Queen of the Skies the same way again. To understand the genius behind the 747, we need to go back to the 1960s. The world was living in post-war euphoria. The global economy was growing at a dizzying pace, and commercial aviation was at the center of this revolution. Flying was ceasing to be a privilege for the few and was becoming an aspiration for the masses. Airlines, led by visionaries like Juan Trippe, the legendary founder of Pan Am, faced a monumental challenge: airport congestion. The skies were getting crowded with Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8s. Trippe had a bold vision. He didn't just want more planes, he wanted a bigger plane, a super jumbo that could carry twice as many passengers, reducing the cost per seat and democratizing air travel once and for all. It was with this nearly impossible demand that he approached Boeing. The manufacturer, in turn, was immersed in another gigantic project: the development of the supersonic transport aircraft, the Boeing 2707. The belief in the industry was unanimous: the future would be sonic. Subsonic flights like those of the 707 would be relegated to the background, perhaps even completely replaced on long-haul routes. In this scenario of technological optimism and imminent disruption, Boeing accepted Trippe's challenge, but with some hesitation. The 747 project, led by the legendary engineer Joe Sutter and his team, who called themselves the Incredibles, began under a shadow of doubt. How could they create a colossal passenger plane, the largest ever conceived, knowing that it could become obsolete in less than a decade? The answer to this dilemma would not lie in speed or luxury, but in a secret versatility, a plan B that would guarantee its future far beyond passenger transport. The promise was grand: to create the Queen of the Skies. But behind the scenes, the plan was even more ingenious: to ensure that even if dethroned, the Queen would still have a kingdom to rule. The great conflict that shaped the 747's DNA was a bet on the future of aviation. In the late 1960s, the industry consensus, from Boeing engineers to Pan Am executives, was that supersonic passenger transport was not a matter of if, but when. The Anglo-French Concorde was already in advanced development, and the US government itself was heavily funding the Boeing 2707 project. The expectation was that by the mid-1970s, the skies would be dominated by jets capable of crossing the Atlantic in under 3 hours. This certainty put Joe Sutter and his team at a strategic crossroads. They needed to design a giant passenger plane with an astronomical development cost of $2 billion, equivalent to over $15 billion today, knowing that its lifespan as a passenger transport could be extremely short. Juan Trippe, despite being the 747's biggest enthusiast, also predicted that his fleet of jumbos would eventually be converted into cargo planes once passengers migrated en masse to supersonic travel. This was not a minor concern. It was the fundamental premise that defined the entire project. If the 747 were to become obsolete for passengers, it needed to have a guaranteed second life, and the only viable second life for an aircraft of such magnitude was freight transport. This economic and strategic pressure was the true catalyst for the aircraft's most revolutionary design. The question was not how to make a luxurious passenger plane, but how to design an efficient cargo plane that could, for a time, carry people. The entire design philosophy was turned on its head. The plane needed to be, at its core, a freighter. This decision, born from the threat of obsolescence, is what gave rise to the iconic hump. The solution to the supersonic dilemma was a work of pure engineering genius, and it is called the nose cargo door. For an airplane to be a truly efficient freighter, It needed to be loaded from the front, allowing containers and oversized cargo such as industrial parts or even vehicles to slide straight onto the main deck. This was impossible with a cockpit positioned at the front of the fuselage, as in all other aircraft of the time. Joe Sutter's team then made a radical decision. They would move the cockpit up to an upper floor. By doing so, they freed up the entire nose of the aircraft to become a gigantic hinged door, and the space behind this new, elevated cockpit. That was the hump. Initially, it was just an aerodynamic space resulting from this structural change. Boeing wasn't even sure what to do with it. It was Pan Am, with its flair for marketing and luxury, that saw the potential of that unique space and transformed it into an exclusive lounge with bars, swivel chairs, and in some configurations even a piano. What appeared to be the height of luxury at 35,000 feet was in fact a byproduct of a purely pragmatic, cargo-oriented decision. The structure of the 747 was designed from the beginning to support the weight and volume of cargo, with a reinforced floor on the main deck and a fuselage diameter wide enough to accommodate two standard cargo containers side by side. Boeing sold the world the image of a flying palace, but it sold the airlines the security of a future-proof investment, a chameleon that could trade its formal wear for work overalls at any moment. For the generation that lived through the rise of the 747, it was much more than a machine. It was a status symbol, a promise of adventure, and a stage for unforgettable memories. Today, flying feels more like riding a bus, but there was a time when every flight was magical, and the 747 was the master of ceremonies. Nostalgic passengers remember climbing the spiral staircase to the upper deck lounge, a place where strangers became friends over a cocktail while the world passed by below. It was an atmosphere of sophistication and camaraderie that has been lost in modern aviation, which is focused on efficiency and seat density. For pilots, commanding the Queen of the Skies was the pinnacle of a career. They speak with an almost paternal pride about the feeling of power and responsibility when flying such an imposing yet graceful aircraft. The colossal size of the 747 required a new way of flying, one that was smoother and more planned. Taxiing this giant through airports was a challenge in itself, but once in the air, she behaved with a docility and stability that belied her weight. Crews felt immense pride in being part of the elite that operated the most recognizable plane in the world. It was an emblem of prestige, not just for them, but for the airlines and even the nations that featured them in their fleets. The 747 didn't just carry people, it carried dreams, ambitions, and the feeling of an era when humanity seemed capable of conquering any frontier. Paradoxically, what made the 747 an icon, its 4 engines and colossal size, eventually became its death sentence in the passenger market. The supersonic future that so haunted its designers never materialized. The Concorde was a technical success, but a commercial failure, and the Boeing 2707 was cancelled. The real threat came from an unexpected direction: efficiency. The oil crisis of the 1970s caused fuel costs to skyrocket, and operating 4 huge turbofan engines became a heavy economic burden. At the same time, jet engine technology evolved by leaps and bounds. Engine reliability increased exponentially, leading to a change in flight regulations. The ETOPS, extended range twin-engine operational performance standards, rules were gradually relaxed, allowing twin-engine planes to fly long transoceanic routes that were previously the exclusive domain of trijets and quadjets, like the 747. Aircraft like the Boeing 777 and the Airbus A330 could carry almost as many passengers as the older versions of the 747, but with only 2 engines. The math was relentless. Fewer engines meant less fuel consumption, less maintenance, and therefore drastically lower operating costs. Airlines, pressured by an increasingly competitive and cost-focused market, began to favor the flexibility and economy of twin-engine jets. The Queen of the Skies, with her insatiable thirst for kerosene, began to look like an expensive and inefficient luxury. Slowly, the majestic silhouette of the 747 began to disappear from passenger airports, replaced by more modern and economical aircraft, marking the end of a glorious era. Although production of the 747 for passengers has ceased and most airlines have retired it, its legacy is immortal. and is present in almost every aspect of modern aviation. The original bet made by Joe Sutter and Juan Trippe proved to be correct, though not in the way they imagined. The cargo version of the 747, with its iconic nose door, became the backbone of global logistics for decades, transporting everything from fresh flowers and luxury cars to vital medical equipment and even other airplanes. It literally built the connected world we live in today. But its most profound impact was the democratization of flight. By doubling passenger capacity, the 747 made long-haul air travel accessible to millions of people for the first time. It shrank the world, connected cultures, and created opportunities that were once unthinkable. The hub-and-spoke concept, where large planes fly between major airports, hubs, and smaller planes distribute passengers, spokes, was perfected and made viable by the 747's capacity. The 747 may have disappeared, but its soul still flies in every modern aircraft. It was not just a plane, it was a teacher, a pioneer, and an engineering monument that taught us to dream bigger. The hump of the 747, therefore, is not just a design feature. It is a monument to foresight, a reminder that in aviation, survival often depends on the ability to adapt to a future that never arrives in the way we expect. What was born as a contingency plan against the supersonic revolution ended up being the key to a 5-decade legacy that changed the world. The roar of its 4 engines may be quieting, but the poetry of its design and the impact of its history will echo forever. It reminds us of a time when flying was an event, not just transportation. A time of optimism, of bold innovation, and of a certain glamour that now seems lost among the tight rows of the cabin economy. The Queen may have abdicated her passenger throne, but her reign in the pantheon of aviation is eternal. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had the chance to fly on a Boeing 747? What was your experience? Do you remember climbing the stairs to the lounge, or simply marveling at the imposing size of that aircraft at the gate? Share your memories in the comments. Let's keep the story of the legendary Queen of the Skies alive.